In terms of common innovation infrastructure, some of the foundational areas that prove important to innovation output in a country are the following. There's some resources, there's some funding for basic science, there's science and engineering workforce, there's a very advanced IT infrastructure. Those seem to be key ingredients in terms of the foundation. There's certain critical policies. You have to protect intellectual property. There has to be incentives for companies to do R&D. Government can help if government acts as a sophisticated purchaser and stimulates innovation by buying the advanced goods for use in government. These are some of the areas that the literature and all the research we've done suggest really are foundational areas. You can see, for example, in terms of the science and engineering workforce, the tremendous differences across countries in the proportion of scientists and engineers in the workforce. And you can see that the countries that are really high innovators have a lot of scientists and engineers in the workforce. And the countries that are not doing very well in this area don't. So part of the story here is just how many people you have with the training and the capability to actually conduct innovative activity. This is one of the key indicators. I won't show you data on all of them, but data is available and has been used to explain why some countries are better than others in this area. In terms of cluster development, this is an example of an innovation cluster in Boston, where I live, in life sciences. You can see that it's not just companies. There are companies that make pharmaceuticals and medical devices, but there's also research organizations, there's also educational institutions, there's also cluster organizations that we'll talk about in a minute. What we find is that innovation is very, very disproportionately high when you have a critical mass, when you have a cluster, because new ideas are discovered more rapidly. It's easier to explore and do research when you have a lot of organizations that you can draw upon. And then, of course, it's much easier to commercialize innovation if you have all the elements in place. If you can get the parts, if you can outsource the components, if you can contract with other firms to actually do the marketing, if you've got all those pieces in place, we find innovation is much more rapid than if a firm has to kind of figure out how to do everything by itself. When it isn't in an environment that's really stimulating and forcing the firm to really continue to push the innovation envelope. So clusters become very, very important. A critical part of the role of clusters in innovation is the networking that happens within a cluster. So innovation occurs often where you have good institutions, like informal networks, like joint research organizations, like university initiatives that connect the university to companies. This is where we see the greatest innovation taking place. And again, these are all organizations that exist in Boston in life sciences. And one of the reasons that Boston is the leading innovation center in the world in life sciences is because the city has been able to combine all these elements in one location. And everybody knows everybody else, and it's a hotbed of ideas and innovation. It's like Silicon Valley in electronics. But we have that in Boston in this field. That's a critical part of the innovation story. Taiwan, you might be curious, how could Taiwan be such a tremendous success story in terms of innovation? Well, really the key to it in Taiwan was building a couple of critical clusters, information technology and analytical instruments, that you can see from this schematic are related clusters. And Taiwan was able to create, through some investments and through a strategy, they built a science park, really dedicated to companies in these fields. They created some research institutions that were very, very advanced, working in these fields. And they established a lot of organizations and institutional structures to kind of get people to collaborate. And as a result, Taiwan went from a relatively low innovation country producing garments and furniture to a very advanced, high-tech, innovation-driven economy. Now, of course, they had the basics, too. They had highly educated people. They had a lot of engineers. They were spending a good bit of money on science and technology. But ultimately, it's this cluster that really built the story. Now, let's go back one slide, because I went one past if somebody's paying attention. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Saudi Arabia here in terms of innovation. How is Saudi Arabia doing? Well, the answer is Saudi Arabia is starting to show the beginning of really a true ability to innovate. You can see this data that compares a variety of emerging economies. You can see Saudi Arabia's U.S. patenting is going up steadily, decade by decade. The compound annual growth rate is solid, as good or better than leading Latin American countries, you can see. Not quite as good as some of the Asian countries that we talk all the time about. And so they are, once again, issuing a strict challenge to all of us with this kind of progress. This is promising. Now, let's look at where the real innovation is in Saudi Arabia. Well, if we look at the key organizations that account for the U.S. patenting in this country, we see something very interesting. No surprise, I'm sure, to any of you, but about 80% of all the U.S. patents in Saudi Arabia come from really three organizations, the three listed here. And look at where these organizations are. They're all related to oil and gas and petrochemicals. Now, should we be surprised about that? No, because those are the areas where Saudi Arabia actually has a cluster. That's where we have a critical mass. That's where we have a really intense concentration of activity. That's where the innovation is going to be. And it's not surprising that that's where most of the innovation so far, as measured in this way, is really showing up. But if we look outside of those areas, we see relatively limited activity. If we look at the geographic mix of innovative activity in Saudi Arabia, again, it's quite concentrated. This looks at both publications, scientific publications in purple, and patents in blue. And you can see that, as is the case in most countries, innovation is concentrated in hotspots, either urban areas or areas where there are strong universities or areas where there is very strong cluster concentration in terms of the businesses located in a particular region. Again, this is not surprising. This suggests that Saudi Arabia is on the path that we would expect it to be, given the state of competitiveness in the economy. But clearly, these numbers are not big enough in terms of really being significant enough to really drive an innovation-driven economy. So the question is, what does the country do? What does the kingdom do to kind of drive the innovation agenda forward? That's the question facing every country. How do we drive the innovation agenda forward? How do we move the needle on innovation in a way that's realistic, in a way that reflects our capabilities and our strengths, rather than try to copy what's going on somewhere in the rest of the world? On the entrepreneurship side, you can see that Saudi Arabia is just beginning. This is an index of entrepreneurial activity across a whole lot of countries, and you can see that Saudi Arabia is in the early stages of really having a lot of private entrepreneurship in the country. And this is, we see some pretty good investments in basic scientific infrastructure and university education. We see the beginnings of some cluster focus in terms of areas where Saudi Arabia is trying to build really a critical mass, but perhaps the entrepreneurial area is the area that's least developed in terms of the overall long-term path towards an innovation-driven economy. I thought you'd be interested. We just summarized some of the programs and policies that have been put in place so far to try to drive innovative activity and become more of an innovation economy in this country. Many of them are familiar to you. I think that probably the most substantial and the most impressive part of the effort so far has been in the area of university and scientific and technology infrastructure. And there's been some massive investments here, as well as in the university system overall, which are really quite unusual in the world. We're starting to see a little bit of building technology parks and incubator-type structures, and we're starting to see some risk capital financing vehicles created, and we're starting to see some efforts on rewarding and encouraging creativity and kind of celebrating innovation and celebrating ideas and celebrating those people that do this kind of work, which again are part of the process of changing the culture, which is again sort of part of the whole innovation equation. Culture is sort of the soft way of describing it, but the culture is partly a function of the reality of the conditions in the country, but culture also has to do with the history and the attitudes that have to change as well. And again, there's some efforts in this country to address these issues. So how would I assess progress on innovation in Saudi Arabia? Well, I think progress is beginning. The best progress has been in the common innovation infrastructure, universities, science base, and so on, research institutions, things like that. That's an area where Saudi Arabia has poured money in large amounts, over the last 5 to 10 years. One of the weaknesses is the still heavy dependence on skills from outside in the area of science and technology. This is an area where there's efforts underway to change the equation, to build the pool of Saudi citizens that have the right training and have the right skills to do scientific and innovative work. But this is, of course, takes longer than even establishing a university. So far, a lot of the innovation efforts have been focused on large global partners, large multinationals, partnerships with foreign universities, things like that. Government has so far had to be very, very heavily involved. This is still a government-led activity. It's not something that's yet bubbling up in the private sector. There's not a whole lot of kind of grassroots effort in the private sector around innovation, and that is going to be a challenge going forward. Cluster development in the kingdom is still relatively limited. There's only a few areas where a cluster really is present. And of course, there are policies now to try to stimulate cluster development in more parts of the country, in more cities, in more fields, but those efforts really need to be amplified and accelerated. Entrepreneurship is only a recent priority. It's a challenge given kind of the historical culture. The other thing I would say is that these various programs to try to stimulate innovation could be better coordinated. There's a lot of disparate efforts. Sometimes they're not necessarily as aligned and coordinated as they could be. And of course, that's a problem facing every country and every government that tries to make changes. This would be, again, one outside observer's view of kind of some of the areas where the progress is greatest, but some of the areas where we need to work harder in the future. What are the next steps for the kingdom in terms of innovation? Well, I think one step, of course, is to keep working on the KAUSTs and the kind of leading, world-class, research entities that are being created. But I think we need to add to the innovation agenda here something more targeted really at mainstream Saudi companies. Because innovation has to be something that spreads more broadly in the economy. It can't just be in one or two university settings or or urban centers. It needs to get spread. And so here I think in many ways we still have a technology transfer problem. And I think some greater focus should be placed on creating ways of helping companies throughout the economy get access to the best technology quickly. The academic institutions and the company and the private sector need to be better connected. We find that that is a critical success factor in innovation. You've got to put the private sector and the university sector together. They've got to be connected. They've got to be networked. They've got to be dialoguing with each other. And there's some of that going on here. The amount of that is growing, but we can do better. I think innovation policy and thinking about future investments in innovation, I think, can be more tightly coordinated and focused around clusters. What are the clusters where we have some emerging strength? Not just in oil and gas and petrochemicals, but also in logistics and also in energy use and also in a variety of other fields. Those are going to be the areas where our technological investments are going to yield the greatest ROI. And we need to be a little bit more focused, I believe, about that. And of course, this whole issue of entrepreneurship in the kingdom becomes a fundamental long-term challenge. How do we get more new businesses started? How do we help entrepreneurs grow more rapidly? How do we celebrate entrepreneurs in the kingdom? How do we make becoming an entrepreneur the most prestigious thing a Saudi citizen can do? We've got to get there ultimately if this country is going to achieve its full potential. I would also say that as Saudi Arabia tries to build an innovation strategy, it shouldn't be trying to emulate what's going on in Boston or Munich or anywhere else in the world. This is a unique place. It has unique conditions. It has unique culture. It has unique history. It has unique assets and strengths. And the innovation strategy for Saudi Arabia needs to be a Saudi Arabian innovation. That is, it needs to innovate around what's unique here and what particular areas in which this country could actually become part of the global innovation system and make the biggest mark. So let me just conclude by just making a few overall points. First of all, I think that this whole issue of competitiveness and upgrading competitiveness and improving competitiveness remains a central challenge today, if not a greater challenge than ever before. I'm so delighted that President Obama at the State of the Union address is going to make this one of the major themes. We in the United States, we've taken our competitiveness for granted. We've just assumed that we would always have it. And we've let our own competitiveness slip in many important areas. And many of us Americans have been really trying to stimulate our government to come together around this agenda, rather than fight about so many other things. So I think competitiveness, even for the United States, becomes a fundamental challenge. We can never turn away from this challenge. We can never assume we're done. And so I think this effort on the part of the kingdom to really view this as a central part of its agenda is absolutely critical. As this country and other countries seek to get more and more productive and have higher and higher standard of living, the innovation agenda gets higher and higher and higher on the list of priorities. But of course, it takes a long time to build innovative capacity. I think it's not too early then for this country to be starting this process of building these assets, changing the culture, putting in place the institutions that will enable innovation to happen. The country has been a leading reformer on competitiveness in general. You've made a lot of progress on some of the basic foundational elements. I think the effort here in the innovation area is timely, and we need to take this to the next level. Similar challenges are facing many, many other countries that seek to go from really emerging to advanced. And Saudi Arabia can both learn from other countries, but hopefully teach other countries a lot of lessons. Well, this session is concluding the GCF, and I want to just say that in sort of as being having the honor of being sort of the last speaker, I want to say again how much I appreciate and congratulate the hosts for putting on this session, for creating this forum for all of us to talk and think and debate about these issues. I think the theme of this meeting, the theme of innovation, has been well chosen and important because this is now on the agenda of the kingdom, but also so many other countries. I hope that as we all gather here next year, we can then sort of look back at what's happened and kind of benchmark the progress that has been made. And hopefully some of these ideas about innovation can be part of what we will observe next year as we look to see the progress that this country is making. So with that, I'd like to invite Fahad Hamid Adin up to the podium. He will conduct the concluding brief part of this program, but I also want to thank all of you for your patience, for listening, for your presence, for your attendance, for your thoughtfulness, and I wish you all good speed and a great year. Thank you.